This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the show. Look, I apologize for being a little hit and miss this last little bit. I'm sure I have some excuse that I could offer, but the truth of the matter is I have just bitten off more than I can chew in a couple of areas, and this last couple of weeks has been pretty intense. Getting my son out on his mission, getting my mom through her 90th birthday and a little celebration, and of course starting in on some community theater stuff that is taking a pretty good chunk out of my schedule. It's been challenging, and I'm not complaining, mind you. Oh, well, I'm so busy, I just don't have time to goof around and do what I want. But I want you to know this program is a priority for me. I find it therapeutic, if nothing else, to talk about some of the stuff that's going on, but also it's good to just kind of get it out there, try to make sense of it. And I know there are people who likewise are just wondering, what do we make of everything that's going on? So for what it's worth, I'll give you my take. You can, I'll cheerfully refund everything you paid for it if it's bad advice. But for what it's worth, I'll tell you what I'm seeing, and then I've got some articles here that I'd like to share that hopefully will give you some insights into, the things that we have control over versus those that we don't. First of all, okay, so Trump has been in office now for a week, and boy, he wasted no time in getting in there and getting busy. And frankly, there's some things. I'm not a fan of tariffs because I believe tariffs are just simply passed on to the, end buyer. So you're going to pay higher prices, and that's the price for protecting American jobs. But for the most part, I'm going to have to say it's kind of refreshing to see the Trump administration come in and just decisively put their foot down and say, okay, all this DEI, gender, pronoun, woke nonsense stops as of today. They're telling these federal agencies, you have to root out your DEI infrastructure. We're not going to support that. If you try to change the name, which apparently a lot of them are doing, well, we'll just omit this from the person's title. They're no longer the chief diversity officer. They're just the chief officer. And yes, that'll just fool us and keep them in a good high-paying position where they're still looking for reasons to reverse discriminate against people who have harmed no one by their skin color. I don't know. I know this is going to sound bad in terms of for people on the left. They're already struggling a lot with what the Trump administration has come in and been doing. Whether it's declare there's an emergency at the border, let's undo a bunch of these Joe Biden, executive orders that have been weighing heavy on us for the last 4 years. That's one thing, but wow, they have just really come in and basically put their foot down, and it's like daddy is home. All the tomfoolery that was going on before is not being tolerated. And I don't like the idea of government as dad, right? Because dad could sometimes be irrational, government can sometimes be irrational, but it's just that sense that there are adults in charge. Pete Hegseth getting confirmed as the Secretary of Defense, and he gives a pretty strong defense of those people in uniform, and I hope he's not hawkish like so many within the military industrial complex are. But then again, their bottom line depends on it. The more weapons the companies that they represent and the lobbyists that they represent are selling, the more money they're making, the better it is for everybody. Except, well, we make bombs and we make, fighter aircraft, or we make guns, and, the people on the receiving end of that, probably not as fortunate, but hey, as long as the, board of directors can say we've turned a nice profit, we've done our part. Crazy stuff. So here's the thing. I do see a few people, though, who are 100% thoroughly freaked out by what they see as, oh my gosh, Trump is coming into office, and it is just 100%, it's a power grab. This is, basically him skipping the enabling act that put Hitler in power in 1933. Now, a lot of that is coming from mainstream sources. And frankly, I've got a loved one who is sending me pretty regular columns from a writer that he's discovered who clearly does not like Trump and sees it as the absolute worst case scenario. And I don't say this to be condescending, because I'm prone to bad news too, kind of messing me up and making me, oh crud, I'm going to be stewing about this all day, or I'm not going to be able to focus on what I need to do. This is one of those times where you and I would be very wise to just step back for a moment, take a breath, step back and evaluate. Is what I'm worrying about something over which I actually have control, or am I just choosing to worry about it because that's what everybody else is worrying about, or I've been told, well, this is a terrible thing and you should be worried about it? Does this make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? I know people, and you probably do too, who spend the vast majority of their waking hours, I'm talking 95 to 99% of their time, is spent focusing on how awful Trump is. And that's from the moment they wake up. Click, on goes the TV. Okay, what's the media telling me about Trump? Oh, yeah, he's bad. He's evil. He's a terrible racist, blah, blah, blah. So they're getting it reinforced at every turn. And here's the crazy thing. He affects them exactly to the degree that they allow Trump to affect them. So if you really stop and think about it, there are plenty of things out there that we do have influence over, places where we can make our influence felt almost immediately. And there's a lot of areas, in politics being one of them, where we're more or less just passive spectators. We're told you're to feel outrage about this, or you should feel elated about this. But I'm going to ask you to just consider, does it really affect you? Because the point is, there's a lot of stuff that we allow to affect us by choice, not by necessity. So if you have that option, if you have the luxury of choosing what are you going to obsess over, hint, hint, we all have that option. Let's try to pick the stuff that's more productive. Now, this doesn't mean you have to be totally unaware. It just means be aware of what you're taking in. Your mental diet is going to reflect in how you see the world. And if right now you're seeing the world through very, very fearful eyes, consider how much of that is a result of what you're taking in intellectually to feed your mind. All right, I feel like I'm lecturing. I'm going to stop here. All I can tell you is, when you make the decision to examine sources of information that actually add value to your understanding and add value to your life, you stop worrying so much about the other sources that just add fear or anxiety or hatred or something like that. In other words, it's possible to find peace, even if the world itself isn't behaving in such a peaceful way. With that, let's dive into a couple of topics that I wanted to share with you. You know, we pride ourselves on living in a free society, but that doesn't mean that we don't have forbidden thoughts that we are not allowed to voice. Got a great article here from Paul Rosenberg. This is actually a rewrite of an essay he did from a few years ago. But he makes a very interesting point, and I don't think he's wrong at all. He says the dominating systems of our world require us to feel weak, afraid, and insufficient. Why would they want that? Well, Paul says they couldn't continue if most of us didn't feel that way. So the friends and operators of these systems have to suppress the opposite thought, which is that we are not inadequate. Now, he says, I've watched popular culture for a lot of years, and he says, I can tell you that since the 1970s, one concept above all has been forbidden in intellectual circles, and that is man as a glorious creature. Don't believe him? Okay, he says, if you want to prove that to yourself, then just say a few things like this at a cocktail party. Say something like, Western civilization has accomplished so many good things that it's mind-blowing. Or, most people are basically decent and don't need to be controlled. I've personally watched heads explode upon hearing those words. Or you could say something like, I see so much goodness in humanity. Or humanity is ascending toward the gods or heaven or whatever. And then he says, if you really like to see a reaction, just say, the human race is magnificent. Paul says the responses you get should be educational. But it kind of raises the question, why is this thought hated? Well, Paul says one reason why many people respond so violently to this idea is simply self-defense. Nearly every adult at this point has built his world around the belief that people are bad. They taught it to their children. They've showed their enlightenment by stating such things at parties and so on. So to admit the opposite wouldn't just be to admit they were wrong. It would tear down their infrastructure of meaning and status. And few people have the courage for such things. Another reason is that they fear being shamed. People who say such heretical things are quickly ridiculed by holders of status. Now that's tyrannical, of course, but it's all too easy to stay inside the conspiracy of compliance. It's dangerous, even heroic, to defy powerful people. Buckminster Fuller described the institutional necessity of inadequacy clear back in 1981, saying there's a built-in resistance to letting humanity be a success. Each one claims that their system is the best one for coping with inadequacy. Do you understand what he's saying there? In other words, the dominance hierarchies running things all claim that theirs is the right way to fix human inadequacy. So if you claim that humans are adequate, you're also saying that those systems aren't necessary. And ruling systems don't like to be called unnecessary. Besides that, you'll notice that the promotion of darkness is a huge business. This is one of the reasons why when I get these emails or texts from this loved one who is very, very concerned about what's going on with Donald Trump, much of that is coming from these sources that promote fear more than anything. They're a major business. Social media is even worse, but most of our mainstream legacy media outlets have become very well-tuned fear delivery mechanisms. And by the way, advertisers need us to feel insecure too. Ads that don't make you feel insecure or inadequate or guilty don't pull nearly as well as those which do. So it can be interesting to see how all of this appears to outsiders. Back in the 1950s, the new president of Indonesia, Sukarno, visited the U.S. and had this to say, saying, I only find one fault with Americans. They're too full of fear, afraid of BO, afraid of bad breath. They're haunted by the fear they'll never get rid of dandruff. This state of mind I cannot understand. And Paul Rosenberg says, well, we shouldn't understand it either. We are magnificent creatures, the only creatures in the known universe who willfully and seemingly create without limit. We've eradicated diseases, we've learned to feed billions of people, created machines that move us across the ground tremendous distances safely and reliably, created machines that fly us around the world at incredible speed. We've harnessed the information stores of humanity and made them available to anyone, almost for free and almost anywhere. None of that is arguable, and yet we still think that we're just a step above refuse. So Paul says, take an honest look. Turn off the TV, turn off your cell phone, walk through the park for a while to let the stream of negativity subside a bit, then take a fresh look around. Yes, some dark things can still be found, but you'll see people mostly just simply going about their business, working, cooking, shopping, tending to children, driving their cars. They do these things well, or at least well enough, nearly all the time. Shouldn't they get credit for that? We are improving, unfolding, evolving creatures. Much improvement remains, but we're moving in that direction. And consider this, please. He says the sea of negativity that surrounds us is an anti-evolutionary poison. It serves stasis and sacrifice collecting. It does not serve progress. And he closes with another quote, slightly edited from Buckminster Fuller. I decided man was operating on a fundamental fallacy, that he was supposed to be a failure. I decided that man was in fact designed to be an extraordinary success. His characteristics were magnificent. And Paul Rosenberg says we are not inadequate, we've just been made to think so. I don't know if you find yourself struggling sometimes, but that is the big lie that we're expected to participate in. Well, people are generally bad, and that's why we need government. That's why we need all these laws. That's why we pay taxes, to make sure that the bad people don't do bad things. And yet people who are paying attention look around and say, well, it looks to me like the bad people got into power. Now they're using that power to make laws that benefit themselves and protect themselves and pardon themselves from any accountability. So what then? Again, turn your attention closer to where you have influence, start exerting that influence, and minimize your governmental footprint. Nothing says no thank you to a politician better than making them as obsolete as possible. All right, having said that, here's another article I want to share with you. This is one that, this one gets me just because I want to see accountability for what was foisted on us 5 years ago, and, what still remains a possibility. And that is the biggest scientific con of the century is finally being exposed. But as Jim Bovard asks, will any politicians or government officials ever be held responsible for the carnage they unleashed on Americans? This is an article that Jim had published on the Brownstone Institute's website. Will federal officials pay for what they did? Now, he reminds us in early 2020, when the COVID pandemic was just starting to ravage America, federal bureaucrats and politicians rushed to suppress any suggestion that the pandemic originated from a Chinese government lab bankrolled by U.S. government agencies. In fact, key Biden administration officials effectively exonerated the Chinese government, even though the Chinese completely stonewalled any outside investigation into the origins of the COVID virus, as the Wall Street Journal recently revealed in a front-page scoop. So the FBI's top expert concluded the virus leaked from the lab, but he was derailed by the Biden administration, blocked from presenting his evidence at a key White House meeting in August of 2021. 3 scientists at the National Center for Medical Intelligence, which is part of the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, concluded that COVID leaked from a lab, but they were muzzled. And the Inspector General is conducting an investigation to determine why those experts were silenced. The Department of Energy also concluded that COVID originated in a lab. In September 2023, a senior CIA analyst told a congressional committee that 6 key CIA analysts had been bribed by the agency to abandon their conclusion that COVID originated in a lab leak. Now, the list just goes on and on here. The Chinese government admitting the pandemic had broken out in the city of Wuhan in early 2020. This may be one of the most brazen cover-ups in modern U.S. history. The National Institute for Health had been financing gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, that type of research seeks to genetically alter organisms to enable the spread of viruses into new species. Such research is extremely dangerous, as MIT professor Kevin Esvelt asked in 2021, why is anyone trying to teach the world how to make viruses that could kill millions of people? The risks were compounded because the Wuhan Institute had a very poor safety rating. 2 years earlier, the State Department confidentially warned other federal agencies about safety issues at the Wuhan labs studying bat COVID, but the disclosure of that alert was delayed till 2022. And again, Jim Bovard just goes right down the list here, talking about top federal scientists who recognized that the pandemic could obliterate their reputations. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes for Health, wrote in an email that a swift convening of experts in a confidence-inspiring framework is needed, or the voices of conspiracy will quickly dominate, doing great potential harm to science and international harmony. But the conspiracy in this case was the facts of the matter. I mean, you had Anthony Fauci, chief of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, speedily enlisting a handful of trusted scientists to gin up a paper supposedly proving that the virus could not have originated in the lab. And a top NIAID scientist accepted the task of debunking the lab leak story because, as he emailed a colleague, Tony doesn't want his fingerprints on origin stories. Then you have The Lancet, one of the most respected medical journals in the world, enlisting in the cover-up with an op-ed by 27 scientists who proclaimed, "We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin." Maybe the same scientists send an addendum to NIH. Keep giving us grant money or your reputation will swim with the fishes. Now, there's a lot more to this article. I will allow you to discover this for yourself. You'll find it at the BryanHydeShow.com, show notes for January 27th, 2024. Will there ever be real accountability? Man, I hope so. Will any federal officials pay for what they did? I sure hope so. Because if the answer is no, then we're likely to get more of what they did. And that just doesn't sit well, or at least it shouldn't. All right, one final note here, and this is if you want to understand freedom and resisting tyranny, you have got to become better acquainted with John Hancock. With the help of Michael Boldin from the 10th Amendment Center, here's an article on the resistance, revolution, and liberty, the untold legacy of John Hancock. Now, you and I know him as the guy who signed his name really big at the bottom of the Declaration of Independence. This is a great little primer to help you better understand who he was and why he was so bold in his stand against tyranny. And by the way, it wasn't without risk. It wasn't like, he was just, some tagger out there with a spray can anonymously, putting his mark on stuff. He put himself in very real danger when he signed. Again, check out my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com, show notes for January 27th, 2025. And thanks again for joining me. Thank you for your patience. I will get my life squared away, once again be back on track, and holding forth right here.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.